What are the challenges which you'd say are unique, perhaps, to managing a network of CDMOs versus a sort of a one-to-one relationship? And I guess it's maybe it's a question about why is a role like yours necessary to do this network strategy piece versus the individual business units just having their own relationships?
Mhm. Yeah. So first, I want to say, right, I'm not the only one doing that, right? In PMS,
Mhm.
right?
Sure.
Strategy is a very big topic, right? And you have that in different levels and different views. Um, but when it comes to relationship management, these have quite often the characteristic of day-to-day operations, right? You
Hmm.
manage the manufacturing, you're getting your batches released, you're making sure that the quality concerns or deviations are addressed, right? You're negotiating the contract. But when it comes to the long-term view and the network view, there's also always a question of PMS, for example, has very big brands, right?
Mm.
And so you want to have business continuity. So it's always a question where we do what. Do we want to have redundancy in our supply chain? If yes, how much are we giving external, internal, or do we want to have even two sides doing internal the same thing or
Mm.
external, right? All of these questions, they need to be solved. And this is normally not something, given the technical transfer takes you around 3 years at least, right? This is not something you can solve on the operational level. You solve that on an 8 to 10 year horizon.
Hmm.
When you look into the product life cycle of a brand. And then I give you one example, right? Let's say you have a $5 billion brand that is manufactured in one particular plant, right? You say like, I have redundancy, I have an external partner who's doing the same. Then you have another $5 billion brand who's doing actually the same, right? If you have an incident in one location, you're impacting two brands. So when you're
Mm.
doing brand strategy, you don't ultimately see the interconnectivity between different brands that access similar capacity or or the same lines in the same CMOs or the same internal manufacturing landscape. So there is a need to connect the dots, right, and see that from an overall capacity network standpoint, how the different brands are developing in terms of volume and what level of capacity you as a company need to support all of these volumes, and to also see to what level you can support this capacity. Because normally you have an assumption of a long-term supply plan, but then we all know telling the future is difficult, right?
Mm.
Especially if you don't have a crystal ball and the forecasts are never right. So you want to make sure that if there is upside demands, that you still can deliver without generating too much cost with having like idle capacity. But then on the other hand, you also want to make sure that if it's less than what you thought, that you're not running into huge capacity commitments or costs by idle
Mm. Mm.
capacity. So there is always this play of having a long-term view that gives you enough agility, upside and downside, to manufacture and supply whatever comes along your way. With regards to external manufacturing, we're having in BMS a tier system, and we are having identified certain strategic partners. And with these strategic partners, we're also sharing our long-term view, because there it's not only about manufacturing the product, it's also about building the capabilities and the capacities that we
Mm.
need in the future. So we go there and we tell our external manufacturing partners, the suppliers, that's our plan. Where do you think you could contribute? And so it's kind of an iterative process. So we learn about what suppliers can do. Based on that, we develop the plans, and vice versa. What we need, we bring that all together and see like how can we create the balance between internal and external manufacturing
Mm.
that makes sense from a strategic perspective.
So that long-term view, is that sort of 8 to 10 year horizon? Is that typical, would you say, for when you're doing your long-term planning? How far out do you look?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty typical that we're looking around 10 years out.
Mm.
Um, there are some conversations that are maybe even longer term. Uh, I don't think companies in general are yet prepared for these very long-term discussions,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, I think when you think about raising sea levels, right? For example, where will the land be in 100 years, right? Nobody's talking about that, I feel. But I think there is some value in trending long-term developments too. Like maybe
Okay.
not 100-year time horizons, but maybe 20-year time horizons, right? But from a supply perspective, the longer out you look, the more inaccurate your data is becoming. So at a certain moment in time, it doesn't make really sense to predict anymore where you will be, because you know that the variability of the data is very, very high. But then there are certainly certain industry trends that are longer term that you can account for when doing 10, 15-year outlooks, right? Technology developments, for example, especially, for example, in the cell therapy space. Where is it going there? It's an area where it's very highly manual, that is going to be more automated, for example. It's kind of a clear industry trend that you can follow. And
I was
and
going to ask,
account
actually,
for.
I was going to ask, how do you even, for something like cell and gene therapy, how do you even put that kind of forecast together? Because it's at such an early stage. It must be very hard to predict what the demand's going to be.
It's actually the opposite.
Oh,
For cell and gene therapy, it's not around the demand, it's more about the capacity. Cell and gene therapy is restricted by what you can make, not what the demand is.
okay.
So there is a lot more patients than you can serve in cell and gene, and it comes together with the capacity constraints you have with a highly manual process, right? A labor-intense process. And I think there is going to be a while till we are capable of really meeting the true demand by having unconstrained capacity, right? That's why you're building all of these big facilities, why we're driving automation in that field, or the whole industry is driving automation in that field, because we want to lift that capacity constraint and the high cost and reduce the high cost of these therapies at the moment. So it's literally like constraint at the moment. That's what I would see.
Interesting.
While in the other areas, pharma and bio, you're mainly unconstrained if you want to be unconstrained. In cell therapy, it's not that easy.
Yeah. What kind of scenarios do you need to sort of build into these plans? I mean, do you scenario plan for another pandemic, natural disasters? How do you think about that?
So we're having a so-called enterprise risk management system, like IRM, integrated risk management system, where we capture all the different risks that we identify in the company, right? So it's not only potential BCM events. What you just mentioned are BCM events. So we call
Okay.
it PCM events, right? That's business continuity management. So what do we do if the Suez channel is blocked again, right? This type of scenario. What if another pandemic comes? What if you lose a site to whatever reason, fire, flood, snow, like everything, right? So you have this on different levels. You have that on global scale. You have that on a site scale. You have scenarios that you need to prepare for. And so critical there is the so-called recovery time. So
Okay.
whatever scenario you have, like how much time does it take you to come back into operations? And you can mitigate that with different levers. You can, for example, build stock to cover till you come back online with manufacturing side, or you can build in certain flexibility, or you can build redundancy. So there are a couple of mitigation strategies. So this definitely influence the manufacturing network strategy, right? We see like to what level, and there are clearly defined levels that we want to accept and that we don't want to accept, and where we want to build redundancies, or we want to build backup plans and invest into backup plans to create the the business continuity. But on the other hand, there are not only risks, there are also opportunities. And these opportunities are, for example, new technologies. This is like new know-how. This is, for example, digitalization, right? And we need also to account not only for the risks, we also need to account for, we want to invest into the right technology at the right time, into the right know-how at the right time, to be at the forefront when we manufacture. And this is also needs also to be considered when we do manufacturing network strategy, right? To be
Mm.
on a level or be in the right fields when the fields mature and actually start creating value in the right way. And I pick maybe digitalization as a particular opportunity and challenge at the same time, right? Because I think digitalization has a huge opportunity. Also, AI has huge opportunities. At the same time, it's like when you, how we say that, when the only thing that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So we kind of
Yeah.
should not think around digitalization of how are we going to implement it. We should see it more like it's one potential solution. Does it make sense for this particular challenge? Rather than say like, let's implement AI, let's implement digitalization, and then look for the problems. We should more look like what's our challenges as a manufacturing organization and where can we leverage these new technologies to actually create the value that they promise.
Mm.
And I see that a bit in the industry that people approach it from my perspective, and that's my opinion, right? A bit the wrong way in the sense of we are implementing AI, we are implementing digitalization, but then we're not clear what value it really generates and potentially creates more work than benefit in the end.
When you're thinking about the network strategy, you're thinking about the small specialist contract manufacturers, which I'm sure every business unit has their own preferred suppliers that they work with. Maybe there's larger, more generalist suppliers who you can have longer term strategic relationships with, and then of course you've got the in-house. What does that look like for you? Is there an ideal number of strategic partners you'd want to work with? Would it be better to have fewer specialists? What's the overall direction?
Mm. And that's a tricky question because it depends in the end from your needs, right? You have,
Mhm.
for example, you have a pipeline that you want to commercialize. Then if you have a new technology that you don't have in-house, you go probably to one big strategic partner where you can develop your assets and commercialize them on the technology that you don't have, right?
Mhm.
But then you have like, for example, mainly in the pharma small molecules area, you have like a ton of legacy products, mature products that are already off patent, for example, that you need to manage, where it's probably more around securing the continuity of supply, making sure that the cost is in line, right? And it
Mm.
is less about bringing the products as fast as possible to the market. So, you know, it depends on the product portfolio you talk about. It depends on the maturity of the product portfolio as well. And it depends on certain life cycles of certain product groups as well, what you're looking for.
Mm.
So it can change. Sometimes it's the big players in the CMO space. The benefit of them is that they can cover end to end. They can cover from the development cycle to the high volumes to the small volumes because they have all of this end to end capability.
Mhm.
What makes them a great kind of long-term partner. They have also all of the requirements that we have around business continuity, right? They're making their thoughts about digitalization, where smaller players may not have the financial breadth to invest to the same level as big ones, maybe serve one certain niche area, right?
Mm.
But I will not disqualify because of that smaller players because they can sometimes be very agile
Mm.
in certain spaces, and depending on the product portfolio, the product you have, that's probably what is required. So I think in the industry there is a tendency to go to less suppliers to reduce the complexity overall. To give you a clear answer, but then there will always be a space for smaller, highly specialized CMOs or CDMOs that fulfill their role in a certain niche, I would say.
Great, great. Thank you. So it strikes me that your role must work with many different internal stakeholders to get results working across various different business units. I'd be really interested in hearing from you, Daniel, about the kind of maybe the guidelines or operating structures that you've learned or created to be effective?
Yeah, it's indeed a challenge, the broad variety of stakeholders. I think
Mm,
it's a challenge that a matrix organization per se brings, because it's highly networked organizationally wise. What is what brings the benefit of having many perspectives when you look into strategic questions, right? You have the supply chain view, the quality view, the business continuity view, finance, etc.,
mhm.
etc., operations. What brings at the same time a certain level of challenge as well to align. What we use quite often is that we are generating a set of guiding principles that
Okay.
help us like a North Star. In what direction do we want to go? We are clearly defining our strategic imperatives. What's like a must have? What's a nice to have? How are we rating different parameters when it comes to network strategy? That kind of takes away the necessity to always discuss the basics, let's say, of a strategic
Mm,
direction, right? But still, there are different opinions on how what is the priority, maybe around what guiding strategic guiding principle for what particular strategic question. So I think there is a big need for communication, a big need for transparency, and a big need for taking data-driven decisions. And
mhm,
we in BMS, we are driven to create data-driven decision making by presenting to our leadership team when we go with different scenarios or different pathways we can go down, backing that up clearly with data that is provided from the different functional areas, that we have all the data at hand when we take strategic decisions, to be sure that at this moment in time when we take this decision, we are as informed as we can be. There
mhm,
is maybe one part that we in BMS begin to be more cautious about, or pay more attention to, and that's a bit the outside in view. I think in general, bigger companies tend to be busy with themselves and look like what we need, what we want, right? And there is some value in looking, having an outside in perspective and looking like, what are industry trends, what
mm,
technology out there, where is it going, and take that into consideration, as well as only what we want, where we want to go and look like, and what's out there too, and consider that too when we do decision making. And I'm very happy to see that in BMS we're having that view too, that we're not getting like kind of arrowed in on our path
mhm.
with our opinions, our view of the world, that we also consider the outside in view. What's the industry doing with this particular problem, right? For example, sometimes you can have information freely available on the internet that you should consider when doing business.
Any advice for someone who's taking their first steps of going into network strategy? How would you get started? Maybe they've opened up Excel and they've just got nothing but empty cells. Let's say the company hasn't done it before. How would you get started as network strategy? Are there any? Well, you mentioned strategic principles just now. What would you consider if someone was just getting started?
I think the network strategy should not be seen as a silo within the company. The
Mm,
manufacturing network strategy should be connected somehow to your company strategy. So before you can really start doing your network strategy, you need to understand where is the company as such going. What
mm,
are new products to be launched? How does your pipeline look like? What are the demand profiles you need? What are the capabilities also that you need? Not only the capacity, also the capability. Then probably there's also some value in looking back and see like, how did the certain KPIs trend in the past, and how
mm,
does that reflect into the future? How what can you learn from the past too, right? What is potentially pain point that you want to solve for? So yeah, you have your risk maps, you have your KPIs. So kind of do like the buffet of everything that is there together with the company strategy. How does the plate needs to look like in the end, where you want to go, right? The cost and so on. And then create like the pathway to the future and see like, if we do this and this and this activities, then we will land there. And that will create us the competitive advantage for the company in the future to be there as a manufacturing organization to contribute to the overall company success and the continuity of supply. I think that's a lot easier to be done in a smaller company because the ways are very short, right? You are very much more connected to the different functions and also to functions like marketing, sales, development, R&D, and so on. Then in bigger companies, you're almost overwhelmed with data sometimes, where you need to select what is really relevant for this question and what is not. So short answer maybe for you, when you start new, put all the relevant data on the table, have an understanding of the company strategy, and then connect what is it that manufacturing needs to do in order to make the company strategy successful, right? And but that's what we are doing with guiding principle. We're connecting them to the company strategy and to break them down and give a path for manufacturing strategy and say like, if we do this and this and this and we follow this criteria, then we are contributing positively to the company strategy and the success of the company as overall, right?